Now for Global Business Updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning.
Good to have you in the studio.
Yes. It's the inclement weather outside. So we begin in Asia. The United States has opened up a probe. They've accused CATL and Gotion. These are two of the top 5 biggest battery makers in China of using forced labor in the Xinjiang region. So the markets in China fell on the news. You've know, of course, about the fact that the number of companies in China have been accused, not just in Xinjiang, but also Uyghur labor, forced labor. So, they essentially just fell. But I'm going to get back to Gotion much later in this segment, because they also made some big news in Morocco, in northern Africa. So basically, their stocks fell. So that's why you're looking at a number of things. Although I think exports for China came out today, it climbed, but that wasn't enough to push the markets upward. So India, the Reserve Bank of India held interest rates at 6.5%. I believe this is the 8th time in a row. The last time they raised rates, I think by about 250 basis points, was back in February of 2023. Since that time, they've held things in place. That's the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Mr. Das. He says that the Indian economy is robust, it's resilient. They've raised their GDP forecast. Their annual fiscal year ends in March, so I think India grew by about 8.2%, one of the faster growing economies in the world. 7.2%, they've increased their forecast, and you see retail inflation there at 4.83%. He still says that food inflation, particularly prices for vegetables, are in the high double-digit realm, and so they want to see a deceleration in inflation before they can start to reduce rates. We go to Europe, and indeed, the ECB did in fact cut rates by about 25 basis points yesterday. First time since 2020 or so, or 2019 that they've cut rates. And I think the language, though, listening to Christine Lagarde, she didn't actually give any roadmap as to what could happen at the next meeting in July. They said maybe, this is the markets now and pundits saying the next cut could possibly be September. But here she is, and I really do want you to pay attention to what she was saying.
The Governing Council today decided to lower the 3 key ECB interest rates by 25 basis points. We are determined to ensure that inflation returns to our 2% medium-term target in a timely manner. We will keep policy rates sufficiently restrictive for as long as necessary to achieve that aim. We will continue to follow a data-dependent and meeting-by-meeting approach to determining the appropriate level and duration of restriction. In particular, our interest rate decisions will be based on our assessment of the inflation outlook in light of the incoming economic and financial data, the dynamics of underlying inflation, and the strength of monetary policy transmission. We are not pre-committing to a particular rate path. In any case, we stand ready to adjust all of our instruments within our mandate to ensure that inflation returns to our medium-term target and to preserve the smooth functioning of monetary policy transmission.
So she said we're not going to commit to a rate path, which means that, look, it's not going to be certain that you'll cut in the future. But interestingly enough, when they gave their GDP forecast and their inflation forecast, they actually raised their inflation forecast for the Eurozone, which I thought was quite curious. So it's a lot of mixed data there, mixed outcomes. Anyway, to the United States, the big day, of course, is jobs. We're expecting, at least the market's expecting anywhere from 180,000 to 185. This is the U.S. jobs report for May. April was 175. Unemployment rate is expected to stay at 3.9%. Biden has been beating his chest about it being under 4% for a number of years now since he came into office. And for the Fed, they're going to be looking at your average hourly earnings on a month-on-month and year-on-year basis, because if those continue to rise, because wages are rising in the United States, people have more money in their pockets, they will spend that money, and that, of course, will have its own inflationary impact. So the Fed is going to be looking carefully at that. And again, as I said yesterday, the ECB has front-loaded, they've gone ahead of the Fed. So they have to hope the Fed cuts rates at their next meeting. If not, you have that interest rate differential, which will weaken the EU currency. Still in the U.S., the Justice Department apparently, I think, and the Federal Trade Commission are opening an antitrust probe into the artificial intelligence industry. And the three companies who are apparently at the center of that probe are Microsoft, OpenAI, which Microsoft has invested about $13 billion or so in there, and NVIDIA. So the fear, at least from that, you can see how quickly the regulators are moving. They think that there could be, an oligopoly here where too much of the industry is concentrated in just a few big players, which could now dictate where things go. As a result of that, NVIDIA's stock did drop yesterday, and so NVIDIA is no longer in the $3 trillion club. But of course, I mean, with this is how stock markets move up and down. So NVIDIA fell to like 2.98 trillion, which means now Apple is now back at number 2 after Microsoft. I did mention Goshen. Now we come to Africa now. They've announced a $1.3 billion investment in Morocco for a battery plant, a gigafactory. So they are the 5th firm to announce battery operations, at least as far as electric vehicles are concerned, in Morocco now over the past how many months. And the initial capacity is about 20 gigawatt hours. The potential capacity could increase to about 100. But key, look at the bottom there. In industry automotive exports for Morocco climbed almost 30% to $14 billion. So as far as Morocco is concerned, they are very much in tune with what electric vehicles and the industry could do for their industry. Which brings me, of course, to us here in Nigeria. You had a great conversation yesterday with the gentleman from the LPG industry. And I did notice you did talk at least once about electric vehicles. But the government here has talked about CNG so much that it's almost as if that is the only energy alternative that we have. And when you mention the electric vehicle ecosystem to a typical Nigerian, they'll say, we don't have lights and so on and so on. But you can address this with policy, right? You can kill 3 birds, as I call it, with one electric stone, where you're trying to improve your capacity for generation, transmission, and so on. At the same time, improving that in Nigeria, you can run concurrently with an EV plan where you're wanting to increase your infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and so on. And also, if you look at what's happening in Morocco, get investment into places like Nasarawa, where you have lithium, which is a key ingredient for the batteries that will run that. All this talk of minimum wage and improving Nigeria's productivity and inclusive economic growth, none of it will happen unless Nigeria's industries expand. And the only way your industries expand is if you seek new pockets of growth to create jobs within them. Where's my wish list? I've put this thing up now for the last 9 months since the ministers were announced. This is specifically for the mining industry. Not sure how many more times I can mention this, but we have not seen any significant investment in our solid minerals sector since ministers were announced. The potential there is incredible, but nothing's happened. And as far as we are concerned, as far as our roadmap, I don't know where these other pockets of growth are going to come from.
So a couple of things. Why they are taking all of these investments to Morocco is that, you see, that king is so serious.
Yeah, he is.
The man knows what he's doing. We are not serious here. We don't know what we are doing. You think it's only Goshen investing in Morocco? Do you know car steerings and some other parts, OEM manufacturers are in Morocco?
Yeah.
That's why you're seeing that the number is topping 14 billion in auto industry exports. So they have an auto ecosystem.
Yeah.
Our own auto industry here, we are still importing CKDs.
That's right.
That we've been doing since before or a little after independence, that we're doing with, what's it called? Bedford trucks.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're doing in the 60s. We import CKD, I think it was USC Motors in Apapa. We import CKDs, couple them together for Bedford trucks. That's what we are still doing, close to 60 years after. Morocco is actually doing the real manufacturing of the components, apart from probably like Innocent that is manufacturing some parts of the component.
Yeah.
So we are not serious. As regards antitrust and for
the AI,
it's a good move, to be able to remind these guys that you can't bolt away. But in all retrospect, I think OpenAI, Microsoft, and NVIDIA bolted away from the stable.
Yeah.
and it's reflective in what is happening. But there are also smaller AI companies.
That's true.
That's the next ecosystem I should be thinking. Nigerian government should be having hackathons and putting some more money into indigenous AI companies. I keep talking about one that is owned by somebody close, we call RegFile, where they are using AI to be able to track transactions, fraudulent transactions. These are companies government should look into. The company won a competition recently in Washington, and the Nigerian government was there. How are you investing in companies like RegFile and the like? So, because it's an open source for all of us.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with the antitrust laws, they're saying that in 9 days, about 9 days would have the outcome. And in terms of that, what the implication would then be for these big companies. Perhaps that's why we've seen NVIDIA, a short-lived victory, despite all the celebrations we had with them for, being second with regards to the market share. But beyond, I wanted to talk about EV, Rotus, because I asked the question around the option of EV.
Yeah.
And like you said, the conversation is around CNG, and now LPG has come into the mix, but it's gas. When we have potential in EV, which is a cleaner source of energy and which the rest of the world is moving towards. I'm saying this because it's typical sometimes, not just in Nigeria, but on the African continent, where we are lagging behind. When we should be thinking of, okay, meeting where the world is, we are still saying, okay, let us move on to the next step. We don't have to move on to the next step. We can skip several steps to get to where the world is. And the future is EV. Even though we might say, oh, well, we're going to afford it, we don't have power, like you mentioned, we don't have electricity, but we must, number one, invest in that and also be able to attract FDIs. I asked you a question, where are all these people? Why are they going to Morocco? Why are they going to Egypt? Why are they going to other countries? And we've deliberated a number of times as to why, unfortunately, in some areas, our climb hasn't yet shown that attractiveness for investors to come in with regards to, corresponding government, whether, show of policy direction, justice system, security, and the likes. But I do believe that there's a gold mine there. I think it's Aldum, one of the Aldum brothers who comes on to talk about it and very passionate about that. And I think that's something to explore. We don't have to kick away CNG or LPG options in order to do that. We can do it side by side. We don't have
Everything
to.
Can go at the same time.
And the government shouldn't just see it as a CNG, the only solution is CNG, because the same way they're going to have to invest in CNG and LPG is the same way they're going to have to invest in EV vehicles. Right. And with the competition, finally, we've talked about challenging Tesla in terms of the EV vehicles. I'm seeing that it's going to become cheaper. So that talk about affordability is going to also reduce later on, because the competition, Xiaomi has come into the market, so it's going to get cheaper. We need to actually start looking at that.
Smarter,
yes.
longer range, 2,000 kilometers now.
Exactly.
Longer
longer range.
We
also have, in terms of the raw material, like you mentioned. So
in Nigeria,
there's something for us here as well. So I think beyond, and I'll continue speaking about that let's not just focus on CNG. Once we hear one thing, we just focus on it and we don't look at the other options. EV should also be brought into the conversation.
Okay, let's talk about inflation, which is a subject that we have always dealt with on this table. Now, the big development now is the European Central Bank, led by Christine Lagarde, reducing rates, cutting borrowing rates. Inflation in the Eurozone in April was 2.4%. It went up to 2.6% in May. And now what they have done is to reduce, the borrowing rates, the interest rate, from 4% to 3.75%. And this is considered a milestone in terms of where we're coming from, at a point where, central banks around the world were increasing interest rates to address the issue of the pandemic, costs in living wage, and costs in terms of energy. Now, Christine Lagarde promised that the European Central Bank will take the courage in leading the process. This is coming shortly after Canada did a similar thing, Sweden, Switzerland, Brazil, Mexico. So the question now is, have we reached a point whereby these central banks are going to cut down on interest rates? And the question is, will the US and the UK follow suit? Inflation in the UK was, at the last count, 2.3%, down from over 11% in 2022. The PECI, which is the index that the Federal Reserve prefers, is 2.7% in the United States. So the question is, Will the UK and the US also follow suit? Are we seeing a trend, with regard to inflation and these central banks reducing interest rates? That's the big question there. However, there's still a lot of uncertainty attached to what the European Central Bank has done, what is called a reverse Trichet moment. Trichet, Jean-Claude Trichet, was, president of the ECB in between 2008 and 2011. He increased interest rates twice. When Mario Draghi took over in 2011, one of the things he did was to slash down those interest rates because the Eurozone had gone into recession. So the question now is what is likely to follow. However, the expectation by the analysts is that the US Federal Reserve is not likely to cut interest rates. Today, at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to have, according to the Office of Labor Statistics, the figures, with regard to job.
Yes.
The projection is that there will be about 190,000 additional jobs, up from 175,000 last month. And again, we're also expecting non-farm payrolls, private payrolls, which are things that the Federal Reserve considers important. So you are likely, the analysts are saying, not to find the Federal Reserve increasing rates or cutting rates rather, till maybe September or December. And at the UK, whose MPC is going to meet on June 20, is also now likely to shift from the 5.25 range where the rates are at the moment.
Yeah.
Finally, I wanted you to comment on this back and forth over whether there's fuel subsidy or
Doctor.
not. Why is government perpetually contradicting itself? I'd asked the question before you joined us.
Yeah.
Why did they have to release a draft document that is unapproved, that Mr. Ononuga says is false?
Right.
I mean, these things are easier to handle. I don't understand why there is this much confusion.
I don't need to add anything, Doctor. You've analyzed it perfectly. It's the fuel subsidies are still being paid. We've told the truth here. Yeah. We've showed you the difference between diesel, which is not being paid with subsidies, it's deregulated, and fuel prices. I mean, the math is there. Everybody can tell. Fuel subsidies are still being paid. Don't let Bayo Onanuga deceive you.
Okay, finally, China seems to be doing better.
Right.
With exports.
Yep.
With imports, particularly within the ASEAN region. They may have issues with global restrictions, on trade, but they seem to be doing well.
Yeah.
Growth, as of May, is about 8.2%, even exceeding expectations.
Indeed, but property sector is still a bit of an issue. But China is doing well. It's coming up. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Rotus.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you in the studio.
Certainly,
Maybe once in a while, make it a Friday thing. Just come in here. See you at 11 for Global Business.
You want to change policy.